Joel Rampoldt of AlixPartners, welcome.
Hi, Robert.
Joel, how can grocery retailers survive in this economic downturn now and looking ahead?
Well, I think we should start off by saying the industry's done an amazing job coping up till this point. The employees in the industry have really stepped up, and the grocery industry is keeping America supplied with food. Going forward, we think that comps are going to continue to be very high for the grocery industry. That the immediate downside demand side spikes have subsided a bit as everyone's filled up their freezers and pantries. But the bottom line is eating out is not going to be an option for most people anytime soon. And even when it is, they're going to be going back to that on a limited basis. So comps in grocery retail are going to continue to be very high, and grocers are going to have to deal with that. They're going to have to deal with just an elevated level of tonnage going through their supply chains, which is going to put quite a strain on them. There's going to be issues in particular with fresh. We've seen meat processing plants going down, and we sort of expected that to happen. And that's going to be a particular pinch point for grocery retailers.
On one hand, I would think that the crisis would be a boon for them because so many more people shopping and buying more when they do go to the store. On the other hand, as you point out, having to shift emphasis more toward online or towards some of the other types of options must create whole new areas of risk, including the increasing use of online. So could you speak to what some of those additional risks are and how these retailers are dealing with that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, anyone who doesn't have great sales right now has really fundamental problems, right? Everybody has great sales right now. The problem is going to be what happens going forward. A lot of people are discovering e-commerce right now. Like, people are discovering click and collect and home delivery. And some of those people will go back to shopping in the stores, but many of them will not. Once they've realized how convenient it is to shop on their app and then have it either loaded into their car curbside or delivered to their home, they're never going to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts a lot of pressure on grocers' P&Ls because fundamentally they're having to do work that the customer used to do for themselves, and in some cases without getting paid for it. So the cost of picking and packing, the cost of loading the groceries, getting them into the cars, the labor cost that goes along with that, the partner cost of having it delivered to the customer's home if you go that way, and the increased shrinkage. The increased shrinkage from leave behinds and misfills and having to upgrade customers because you have an out on an item. All of those are going to put a lot of pressure on grocers' P&Ls if, as we believe, the level of e-com penetration is going to be a lot higher going forward, even when we get back to normal.
We know that Amazon was ready for this because that is Amazon's whole thing, e-commerce. But were other grocery retailers, were the brick and mortar grocery retailers ready for this environment with, as you point out, a click and collect option? Or have they had to play catch up with their capabilities?
Some are playing catch up. There are some that clearly have been working towards this point for years. There are companies that have invested tremendously in their click and collect capabilities, their buy online, pick up in store capabilities, and this was much smoother for them. They had to deal with a massive uptick in demand, but they were basically ready because they had the technology and they had the stores associates trained to do it. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of other folks are really playing catch up, and I think a lot of people in the industry thought that e-commerce grocery was either never really going to be that much of a factor outside of the dense urban cores, or that whatever business they got would be incremental. And so it didn't matter that much what the margins were on it. But now, I think it's pretty clear now, e-commerce is something you're going to have to do just to retain the business that you had. And it's not just about picking up new share, it's about protecting what you have. And a lot of folks are playing catch up to do that.
You alluded to the closures of some factories, which has caused a problem in supply. To what extent do grocery retailers have to change their sourcing strategies? Are they more local or just changing where they're getting the stuff? Is that a big challenge, and how are they addressing that?
Right. So the context for that I would start off with is there's just a lot less slack in the system than there was before. Right. Grocers have become much more efficient. Their suppliers, their transportation providers have become much more efficient. We estimate that in the last 20 years, the industry inventory turns have gone from something like 12 to something like 18. So that just tells you you're starting from a position where there isn't that much slack in the system. And when one part of the supply chain goes down, as we've seen recently, it's much harder to recover. So I think that grocers are going to have to build in more safety stock, which is hard because grocers don't get paid by anybody for holding inventory. right? It hurts their working capital. They have to commit more working capital, and there isn't an immediate obvious financial payoff to doing so. But I think they are going to have to hold more safety stock so that they can deal with disruptions and be in stock for their customers.
But scaling up on the e-commerce side, I would imagine, would be a big problem. It requires a complete transformation of your operations, what your employees are doing, where you're stocking, where you're delivering. Again, creating e-commerce at scale. Is that something that they are successfully doing?
Some are, and some are struggling with it. Now, there are a lot of different ways to go about this, and it isn't the case that you have to go out there and build an enormous capability yourself. Some of the biggest players have done that, and they have built their own capability, their own technology, their own processes, but there are other ways to do it. You can partner with people. There are white label providers of various aspects of the grocery e-commerce solutions. So folks have the choice. Are they going to partner for some things and build their own for other things? Building your own from beginning to end is probably not a viable option for any except the very, very biggest companies out there, because it just takes way too much capital. So they need to build themselves. So it's going to be a hybrid approach eventually for most.
Well, let's look down the supply chain in the other direction, and that is to the customer. I know that retailers are trying very much to create incentives for shoppers to shop with them. At the same time, there's always that question: is if you bend over backwards too much, then suddenly you're not making a profit anymore. So how do you balance those factors?
A couple of observations. One is a lot of the things that the industry has typically done to drive traffic, they're not doing now, and they shouldn't resume doing it anytime soon. And I'm talking about really heavily margin degrading promotions on items where they get much money to begin with, but they felt they into the store.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those promotions have just been stopped because their metering traffic. People are starting to think, okay, how do we not go back to where we were so that we don't have to go back to an incredibly heavy promotional cadence to drive customers into the store, focus more on everyday value, focus more on selection and service and all the things that they really want to differentiate themselves on. So I think we're going to see a bit of a shift as we come out of this, and that some of those heavily discounted, margin destroying promotions are not going to come back anytime soon.
Just give me a general idea of what the new normal might be like, because all these changes we're talking about are essentially going to be permanent. I think everyone agrees they're not going to go back to the way it was before. What might it look like with respect to balancing e-commerce and brick and mortar and just the whole thing? Can you give me just a real general statement about what this new normal might look like in the grocery retailing business?
So I think a lot of the changes that we've seen made in the past 8 weeks are not going to be reversed, at least not any flow in the aisles and physical barriers between the customers and the cashiers, and the elimination, if the sharp reduction, if not outright elimination, of self-service departments. That's not going to change. That's going to be with us for a very long time. And the enormous spike that we've seen in e-commerce, I think, will settle back. And once customers have more of an option to go into the store and they feel safe doing that, there will always be a lot of customers who prefer the in-store experience, want to select their own meat, want to select their own produce. Some of those customers will go back into the store, but many will not. And the level of e-com participation is going to settle out at a level that's much higher than what we had going into this crisis.
Joel Rampoldt, I want to thank you so much for being with us today to talk about some of these major changes that grocery retailers are facing today and in the future as a result of the pandemic and whatever other disruptions might come down the pike at some point. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Robert.